Thank you, friend Damon. We go back a long time. I was confused when I came up here tonight. They told me we had the chief of police and we had a man of the cloth. I thought, and they finally caught up with me. They're going to have the last rites now. I'm not accustomed to being up here with men with those handles hung on their name. I just wish they were down in the audience where I could look down my throat at them, look down my nose at them like they used to look at me. You're a beautiful bunch of diseased people. You know, I'm real glad I sobered up while I'm still living. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gotten to know you people. And I've been sober ever since I can remember. Y'all a little slow. I didn't have any trouble with the demon alcohol for 16 years. I went along a happy-go-lucky kid. I had a good childhood. It lasted a long time, but I had a good one. And then at 16 years of age, I had a slip. And it lasted 49 years. As I said many times, I took my first drink at 16, blacked out, got sick, and was in the devil of a shape. And 49 years later, I stole some wine, blacked out, got drunk, and I never did make any progress in drinking during all of these years. In fact, it continuously got worse. And I had to eventually make that decision that the lawman was telling us about here today. I spent last night in a motel, didn't get much rest. I'd gone to bed and dropped off to sleep. And along about 1 or 1:30 this morning, there was some beating on the door and some screaming. And there was a middle-aged blonde there. And I couldn't get her to shut up for anything. And I finally had to get up and let her out. Now, you give sobriety dates in Texas, and I'm in Texas a lot, and when I'm in Texas, I give my sobriety date. But I'm told that you give sobriety dates because you want the new person to know that you have one, and that this thing can last for a long, long time. But that's not the reason I give my sobriety date. I give mine because I'm bragging. And evidently I am, because my mother passed away a few years ago with over 92 years of continuous sobriety, and she never mentioned it. Now that I have the spiritual part of the program out of the way, I might as well get on with the business at hand. I'm an alcoholic, and my name's Franklin Williams. By the grace of God, to fellowship with men and women like you, and because this program works, it hadn't been necessary for me to take a drink today, and for this I'm most grateful. I'll have to start at the back end of my talk and just jump around. In fact, that's the way I drank. I had no system to it. I just drank what was there when I could get it and so on. But I don't want to forget this. My wife passed away a little over 5 years ago with over 25 years of continuous sobriety. Many of you knew her. She, of course, achieved that sobriety in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. But way along in the thing, and I forget the number of years, but we were at Tuscaloosa, Alabama, visiting some real good friends. And this friend of Eloise's named Singy very quietly said, Eloise, you need to join Al-Anon. Now, Eloise didn't just jump into something. She had to think about it. So when she died, she was in the 18th year of a 10-month diet plan. So she just didn't up and do things. She had to think. Which I was told thinking is the worst thing in the world that an alcoholic could do. But Eloise did join Al-Anon and got to be a real Al-Anon. You Al-Anons call her a double winner because she had success in both programs. She was a tough sponsor. She believed in only conference-approved literature, and she ran a tight ship, and she sponsored a lot of girls. I mean, a lot of girls. Eloise had a little 10-year-old daughter when we married, and Mickey grew to really hate me. She used to shake her finger in my face and say, you're not my daddy, and you don't have a thing in the world to do with me. Well, you know what I did. I reacted. And things just kept getting worse and worse. And they could run me out of the house. There wasn't any physical violence, but my goodness, the words and the treatment. I'd get mad and jump up and leave. And she'd get mad and jump up and leave. She'd go home to Mama. And I'd finally forgive her and let her come back. But it was a dog fight, and I don't see how we ever survived. I don't know what year this was in, but it's surely as much as 15, 18 years before she died, that things began to shape up. My boss was working better. Eloise was working her program better. Mickey was doing better. Just everything was getting better. And later I came to decide why it was. It's because of the programs. We were both applying the programs to our daily life. And today, Mickey, the daughter, lives just 6 miles from me. On Sundays, when I'm not out holding services like this, I go out there on Sunday morning and have coffee with her. And Mickey will walk to the car with me and put her arm around me and say, Franklin, you're the only daddy I have, and I love you. We have a beautiful relationship, which would have been absolutely impossible without the programs of Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon. I got to where I made a lot of these trips like this. Eloise did some talking. She spoke as a double winner. And we were able to make a lot of trips together. She didn't get to go to as many as I did because she worked. And I tried not to do anything to interfere with that gal's work. But I had wanted clearly understood that broad didn't have to work. She could go naked to starve to death if she wanted to. That was a decision she had to make. I made a decision before I came up here tonight, before to whether to go to the bathroom or not. And right now I made the wrong decision. So I'm not good. I'm not very good at I can sum up this whole program of Alcoholics Anonymous with 6 words. I have to mention my sponsor because he played such an important part in my life. And he told me to get things simple and to follow directions. And he preached that to me. So I adopted 6 words to sum up the program. Trust God, clean house, and help others. And this covers the whole ball of wax as far as I'm concerned. And I say these 6 words every morning in my meditation. I don't just power pad them. I meditate over them and think about them, and they are still important in my life. I mentioned my sponsor. I don't ever want to talk without mentioning Al-Anon. Incidentally, regarding you Al-Anons, that lawman intended to make an announcement, and he forgot it. He says this building is supposed to be fireproof. But they like to take every precaution, and there's going to be a big crowd here tonight. And they ask that in case of a fire, in case there is one, would the ladies still remain seated till all of the alcoholics are out to safety? I don't know how strict he's going to enforce that, but you be your own judge. I think sponsorship is a thing of the past. It's a lost art in Alcoholics Anonymous. It is at the places that I know anything about. All these young people coming in, and not just young people, but young people coming in. They hear about you're supposed to get a sponsor, and some of them will get somebody that came in the day before they did, or the day after they did. And in 10 days' time, one of them gets drunk and the other one gets drunk. They don't know what sponsorship is, and they don't seem to want to listen to you. Somebody that's a tough sponsor like David was to me, and that I try to be, they don't want anything to do with me, because I tell them things they don't want to do. And I tell them quick that I'm not going to fool with them if they don't do what I tell them that I don't fool with anything except successes. I don't fool with failures. And they'll ruin my reputation. So when they get ready, go out and do some social drinking. I show them in the book where it says go try some controlled drinking. Try some social drinking. And then if you can't handle it, maybe you're ready. So all I know is tough sponsorship. And David was as tough as they get to be. Talking about doing away with ego, inflation of ego at depth. I believe David invented that, but he could really knock down that ego. He took me to a meeting every night for a number of nights, for a lot of nights. Finally put me out one night and says, I'm not going to pick you up anymore. I said, what's wrong, David? You not going anymore? Yes, I'm going. But you people get dependent on us, and you're not supposed to get dependent on another person, but get dependent on a power greater than yourself. And says, you get there the best way you can. I said, David, you know I don't have any wheels. I don't have any money for a streetcar. He said, we find walking helps. He said, you be there. Well, I was afraid not to go because he was the only one that was paying any attention to me, and occasionally while he'd spring and buy me something to eat. So I had to hang on to him. He took me out to a meeting one night, and on the way out he said, now this is a closed meeting. Well, I didn't know what a closed meeting was, but I wasn't going to ask David. So I said, are you going to talk? He said, no. Says that they may call on me. Well, what about me? He said, yes, they may call on you if they get around to it. Well, I beamed, because this keen alcoholic mind of mine, I had analyzed this program. And I had come to the unanimous decision that we didn't need these old 12 steps that you down and out drunks had. Us intellectuals could make it on 5 steps. So I had cut out 7 of the steps. And I wanted to explain my new program to this group. And I wanted to call General Service and tell them about it. Well, David sensed something, because I got maybe 50 yards from the car, and he said, you bring your behind back here and sit down. I want to give you some directions. He said, if they do call on you, said, you get on your feet. He believed if you had something to say, to stand up and say it. That you get on your feet and tell them you're an alcoholic, and your name's Franklin Williams, and you're a member of the concert group, and sit your butt down. Said, you done told these people all you know. I said, David, I thought, oh no, that's the worst thing in the world that a new member can do is thinking. And said, we'll do your thinking for a year. And if at the end of a year we think you think, we'll let you think. But on that time, we will do your thinking for you, and don't you forget it. He's talking about surrender, always talking about surrender. You got to surrender. You can't get anywhere in this program till you surrender. You got to surrender to the fact that you can't take a drink. You got to surrender to the fact that you can't manage your life. You got to surrender. Finally, one day I said, David, how in the devil do you surrender? He said, I don't know. Well, how you expect me to know when you can't explain it to me? He said, nobody could explain it to me. But I'll tell you this, I'll tell you what happened to me. And maybe the same thing will happen to you if you live long enough. He said, I reached a point where I couldn't get sober and I couldn't get drunk. And alcohol did nothing for me. And I fell to my knees and offered a prayer and asked God to take me and to guide me in this surrender. And David said all during the day, said anytime you have a few minutes to spare, you get on your knees. He believed when you prayed, get on your knees. He said alcoholics may not get on their knees, but real alcoholics do. And you are a real alcoholic. And if you don't believe it says something about the real alcoholic, look on page 21 where Bill says, now what about the real alcoholic? David believed in talking about that real alcoholic. And he was very vicious in calling me a real alcoholic. I told him, you're going to ruin my reputation. There in the beginning, he was going to all these meetings, and he was taking me, and he was talking. I said, David, don't anybody talk except you? He said, nobody you need to hear. He had an answer for you, everything you said. I told him, I was getting a lot of advice. There was a fellow in my group that he taught me how to slip. And I'd try to drink for 6 days and get sober for the 7th day to go to a meeting. I'd been around a little bit, and I just couldn't do it. And I was talking to my slipping buddy, and he says, David keeps telling you about all these musts. I said, there ain't no must in the program. You don't have to do anything. Finally, David said, I'm going to straighten you out on this. I'm tired of hearing about it. He said the word must is in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, in the textbook 74 times. And said, there's one must that's not in there, but it's a must that you need to know and you must know. He said, rarely have we seen a person stay sober who continues to drink. He said, you must not swallow any of that stuff. I had a tough time with David. He was hard to teach something. I read to David for 5 years out of the big book Alcoholics Anonymous before I found out he could read. He knew numbers, and he could find the numbers in there, and he knew where everything was. And I'm grateful that David did this, which I try to do. David never told me anything to do without pointing it out in the big book. And he had me to read it. I thought he was having me to read it to him. But he told me later that I got more good out of it by reading it myself and seeing that it came from the textbook Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I'd go to these outside groups, and they'd bring up some of this stuff about you haven't got to write an inventory, you haven't got the right to do this. There's more bad information floating around in AA than there is good information. And this new man would recognize that if he remembered of reading this in the big book. So we played that game for a long time. Why did I come to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous in the first place? This is a suggested program, and a judge suggested that I come. Now, he gave me a option. I could go to the penal farm or else. So I was faced with that dilemma, a decision to make. I could either go to the penal farm or I could go to Alcoholics Anonymous. And guess what I guessed? I guessed the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because I thought I had more to offer you people than the penal farm had to offer me. Because I knew how to farm, and I didn't especially like farming. So that's where I went. Well, I went to just enough meetings during about a 9-month period to let certain people see that I was at the meeting. My wife had left me for no reason. She said embarrassed her for me to get in jail and my name to be in the paper. I told her, heck, she wasn't the one that's being hurt. I was the one that's being hurt. And of course, by then it had gotten to where it didn't really bother me. I looked forward to seeing my friends there. I knew all of them that's in jail. So this is a suggested program, and I came and went to just enough meetings to let certain people. One, my wife, try to get her back. Some I was trying to borrow some money from. I know I told David, I said, you people got it easy. You got nice wheels, you got nice threads, you got good jobs, you got wives. If I had this and had somebody to sponsor me in a little business, I too could get on my feet. He said, turn to page 98 in your textbook. And he pointed there at the middle of the page and said, read this. It said, wife or no wife, job or no job, our sobriety does not depend on others, but in our willingness to trust God and to clean house. And then he pointed over on the opposite page, 99, had me to read that, then flipped the page 100, had me to read that. He said, what does it say? I said, it says the same thing, David. He said, I know it. So Bill figured somebody like you was going to come around and you'd miss it on page 98. And you'd miss it on 99, but you're bound to get it by the time you got to 100. So I was going to Alcoholics Anonymous against my will. And I certainly didn't want to stop drinking. I know we had a young fellow in our group. He was an intern over at the hospital, 32 years old. Well, now this was back in 1956. We didn't see many people in AA in my area that is 52 years of age. And I used to go to meetings just to watch him. And they'd call on him to get up and say something, and I'd think, what a shame. 32 years of age and shot down in the middle of life. What a shame. That's the way I looked at the alcohol. But I kept going. And finally, I began to get restless and irritable and discontented that Dr. Silkworth talks about in the doctor's opinion. And I knew that unless I did something, I was going to reach for that by which I could gain some freedom. And I knew that was going to happen. And I'd read that, what Dr. Silkworth said, that we'll merge into the well-known spree. Coming off of it swearing we'll never do it again. And how many times had I done that? And I just reached a point where what it amounts to, I hadn't surrendered. And I hadn't gotten honest. Now, when I mention honesty in this program, I'm talking about void of self-deception. And I was a past master at deceiving myself and deceiving you. So I hadn't gotten honest enough, for one thing. And I just wasn't willing. Willingness plays a big part. And I wasn't willing. And I walked along and things getting worse and worse. There wasn't any chance of getting my wife back. Didn't seem to be any chance in getting a job. There wasn't any chance in borrowing some money. And I couldn't get a job, and I was hustling on the streets. The AAs were having a noon meeting at the club, and the ladies would come and they'd bring sandwiches. And they'd have some in a sack, and they'd call me off in the corner and say, we know you're going to be by yourself tonight. you'd be lonesome, and you won't want to get up and go get something to eat, and we just give you. Those gals knew that is what I was eating on for a long, long time. But I reached a point where I just thought it was all useless. And I went out and stole a piece of plastic hose. I borrowed a car, and I hooked up that hose to the exhaust and started the engine. And a peculiar thing happened. I got thirsty. I got thinking about that little spot of wine in my room, in a garage apartment that a friend was letting me have. And what a cruel life it was to leave that drink behind. So I polished it off. Now, while I was in there thinking and meditating, I decided to write a will. I didn't have anything, but I thought, what a shame, me die without a will. So I started writing that will, and David had given me a yellow legal pad to put my inventory on, so I started writing on that. And I said, honey, I'm going on. You can have everything. Oh, I was really a caring person. And I don't know what all I put on there, but I got on the bottom of the page, and I'd been crying so much that tears had dropped down on the paper, and the pen wouldn't write. And I said, see next page. Now, while I was doing all this writing, I just loved to cry when I was drinking. Oh, it was the greatest relief in the world. And I could feel so good feeling sorry for myself. And I'd start writing and start that old graphonola, I called it, is when you had to wind up and had a horn coming out of it. And this person had a lot of old records in a garage apartment. One of them was Al Jolson's Sonny Boy. Well, Nobody Loves Me. And some of this old hillbilly music. And about halfway through, the record had run down, and I'd have to jump up and run over there and crank it up. And I think I'd just pick up the time to my music more as the record began to play. And I just gave out. And I passed out. Well, really, I went to sleep. And there's a difference in passing out and going to sleep. And there's a difference in waking up and coming to. Now, I waked up somewhere around 1 or 1:30, the early morning of October 15th, 1956. Clear of mind, as clear as I'd ever been in my life, and probably clearer. And I have talked to ministers about this, and he says that many times before this person dies, his whole life passed before him. And it's according to what his reaction to that is that determines in many instances whether that person lives or dies. Well, I knew with these things passing that I was at blame at all of them. And I knew where the solution was, even though I'd been around you for a period of 9 months with a closed mind. And I made up my mind that I was going to do this. And I did some work on that first 3 steps on my knees that early morning of October the 15th. I became convinced of the first 2 steps that I could not keep from drinking. I could not handle it once I took to drinking. Therefore, drinking and alcohol I was powerless over. Then in step 3, it said I made a decision, turned my life and will over to the care of God as I understood. And David, I told him I didn't have any understanding. He says, your understanding may be the bottle. You can use that, use anything. So I did, and I used alcohol, and I used the Quonset group as my power. And I remembered what you said in step 4. And I wanted to get to work on step 4, but I realized that before I could do anything in step with my life, I had to first clean up my life. And that's what you told me to do in steps 4 and 5. But let me back up. I got back in bed and slept soundly. Now this is against a wino like me. Slept soundly till around 5:30 or 6 o'clock that next morning. I went over to the neighbor's house and asked if I might call David. I called him and told him what had happened and would he come over, and he did. And he sat down on the end of that brass bed and he told me many things about David. Many of these I remembered he had told me. Some I didn't remember. But most importantly, I told David things about Franklin I had never told another human being. And he said, they're going to get some of your time. Now, he was talking about the men in blue down at the local Bastille. And 2 days later, the Furs captured me. And they took me in. And David, the night before, had just given me some more instructions. He said, all during the day, you get down on your knees, starting with the first thing when you get up in the morning. Get on your knees and thank God for last night's sobriety, and ask for strength and hope to carry out His will toward maintaining sobriety. And I said, David, you know I'm an agnostic. I don't know whether I was or not, but I thought it gave me an excuse to drink. And David said, that don't make a darn. You just got to make up your mind whether you want to be a drunk agnostic or a sober agnostic. I said, I don't believe in prayer. He said, nobody asked you to believe in prayer. He said, show me in the big book somewhere where it says you come here relying on prayer. We come here not believing, David said. We come here not believing. We do some simple things which the steps tell us to do, and we come to believe. Right now, I think after 33 years, almost 34 years, my fourth step of being consummated in the 11th step. With me, it's a never-ending program. I have to keep working on it. I hear people say the 11th, 12th, the 10th, 11th, and 12th step are maintenance steps. What is maintenance in the AA program? You don't stay the same. You either get worse or you get better. And I think that the 10th, 11th, and 12th steps are the growing steps. But we can play with words in this thing. But I have to find something that works for me. So, David did this. I told you he had me to read, and then he had me to explain. And I had to explain a lot of these things to David several times. He was slow to catch on. I mean real slow. And I could notice when some changes were being made. And I'd tell him, David, I'm proud of you. You are really doing good. I didn't think you were capable of doing this, but I guess it's my assistance that's causing you to be so successful. He said, yeah, I guess so. Oh, he's an ornery little cuss. So, he said, now we are ready for step 3, after I became convinced of steps 1 and 2. And you know, I didn't know until then, after approximately 9.5 years, that Bill suggested that we take the 3rd step with another human being and with God. And I took the 3rd step with David and with God. And then he had me to read the 3rd step prayer. And then he had me to say it out loud in my own words, which is about what I say every day now, several times a day, most days. God, I offer myself to thee to do and deal with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. take away my difficulties, so that victory over them may bear witness to those that I might help. Thy love, thy service, and thy way of life. This is a beautiful prayer, and the part of the prayer relieved me of the bondage of self. It hits the nail on the head, because my problem is self. And if I examine what it tells me to do in step 4, I'll find out in that step that selfishness and self-centeredness we think is the root of our problem. So David said, now take your yellow legal pad. And he said, before we get into analyzing step 4, I want you to turn to chapter 4 in the 12 and 12, or the explanation of step 4. And read me the first paragraph there, and what are the 3 God-given gifts that we get. The first is sex, the second is emotional and material security, and the third is companionship. Now these are God-given virtues. They're good because they're God-given. But where I get into trouble is in abusing or threatening one or more of the God-given instincts. He said, now let's get to work on that format on page 65 on resentments. That you need to examine your resentments, you need to examine your fears, and you need to examine your sex. So he said, let's take the format there on 65. I resent Mr. Brown. Why? Because his attentions to my wife. How does it affect me? It affects my sex, and it affects my emotional security, and it affects my companionship. Now I went all the way down the line and put on these these 3 areas of my life, and then put why and what was the end result. And then David had me to read that. Well, I'll get to that a little bit. He had me to read that. I'll get around to it, I hope. So I put all that down. Then I put on my character defects. I didn't know that character defects played such an important part. But he had me to put all of these down, and then he had me to read on pages 72 and 73. There's a taking of a 4-step inventory. Now that's in the other. Those who have skipped this vital step have not relieved their alcoholism. Invariably they drink again. That is, those that haven't taken the 4th and the 5th step. Unless we work hard toward the elimination of the worst of these, both serenity and a peace of mind shall elude us. And I found out that every character defect that I have goes back to ego. Ego goes back to honesty, void of self-deception. All of this goes back to selfishness and self-centeredness. So what did I find out about me in step 4? I found out that my real problem is ego. The bill says that we eat, we drink, we grasp for more of everything, fearing we shall never get enough. What is that but trying to satisfy a human ego? There's no way to satisfy a human ego. So my problem is ego, and the ego goes to self-centeredness. Then that goes to void of self-deception. And what is the end result? The end result is a little 4-letter word in parentheses and in italics, fear. So fear is my problem. So I can better understand why this program is a spiritual program, and I must have a spiritual solution to check it. And it also teaches me that since fear is the end result, the only antidote for fear is faith. So I have to have a spiritual release. This is my opinion. I'm no doctor. But I don't believe that they will ever make a pill that'll cure alcoholism. because there's no way to put love in a capsule. And I think my own only solution is a spiritual experience as a result of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. So after we had thoroughly gone over step 4, David said, "Do you know why you need to take step 4?" I said, "I know what the book says." He said, "The book don't say this, but you need to know it. You need to take the 4th step so you can take the 5th one." I said, "That's darn sharp, David. Who figured that out for you?" You have to take the 4th so you can take the 5th. Well, we went out in the woods, that same place, sat on that same log, out on the lake. And we went over the 5th step. Now, David did something which I do with people with whom I take a 5th step. He took his with me, especially that part of it which had to do with, which was similar to mine. Now, nowhere in the big book, in our textbook, do I remember of seeing where it's recommended that a sponsor take his step with you. But in the 12 and 12 it is. And it was a great help to me to find out that there was somebody that's as big a nut as I was. And it fouled up the way that I had. I was no longer alone. We developed as close a relationship, I believe, as two men can develop. And there were very, very few days that we didn't either see each other or talk to each other on the phone. David died a few years ago, and it's a great, great loss in my life. I knew I had to have a sponsor, because I am a person, I don't know about you, but I change when I don't know that I've changed. But other people know it. And I knew David would tell me. So then my next sponsor was one that many of you knew, old Carl Wright. Well, he was just as tough as David, if not tougher. And then Carl died, and now I've got a young one. So 2 of my 3 sponsors, 2 of them have died. So I told him a pretty big risk is taken. but we're going along. So then after I took the 5th step, he had me to read what to do. He says, go home and get in a quiet place and revisit your 5th step. If you left out anything, to put it in there. So I did, and I didn't think I had left out anything. I think it's impossible for a person on his first 5th step to take a perfect 5th step. In fact, I don't think any of us are capable of ever taking 100% perfect help, because God hadn't revealed enough to us. I think God lets me see enough of myself to do something about that, and when I do something about that, he lets me see something else. And then I had to pray for willingness to get the power to do this, to do God's will. This is really a beautiful program, and there's no end to where we can go in this thing. That's my thinking. So then David said we're ready for step 6 and 7. He said turn to page 76, and in the first paragraph it explains both steps. Don't take much space. I had to become willing to have them removed. See, I had to pray for willingness. There's a lot more praying in this deal than I ever figured. Then after I became willing, then could go do it. I had one amends that I just wasn't going to make. And David said, you going to make it, or you going to, that's down in the next step. But on the character defects, I don't really believe that God has removed my character defects. I think he has removed them for the time being. But he has taught me to recognize these and where to go to do it. I don't think that God's going to do something for me that I can do for myself. And I have to pray for willingness for this, and I have to do the footwork in it. My character defects will return because ego returns. And the only thing that separates me from you and me and the God of my understanding is my ego. And the only way I'm going to get rid of my ego is to get as close to 100% honest, void of self-deception. And this is what I have to continuously pray for. So then he had me to read the 7-step prayer and to say it out loud. God, I am now willing that you take all of me, the good and the bad. Remove every single defect of character which stands in my way of my usefulness to you and to my fellows. May I always do thy bidding. David said we are all right now. Now on step 8 and 9, on step 8, the book says you made a list of the people that you'd harmed in step 4. And this I did. And I put on how I'd harmed and what was the effect. So then I had to pray for willingness. And there was one of men I just wasn't going to make. David said, you'll make it or you'll get drunk. So he loaned me his car to drive that 75 miles to see that man, and I made those amends. And we became very, very close friends. He had died a few years ago, but we had straightened things out, and things were really good between us. Continued to take a personal inventory, and when wrong, promptly admitted it. Promptly with me can mean 10 days, 2 weeks, a month, depending on how badly I hurt. If I hurt badly enough, I'm going to do something about it, because you have given me the tools to do it. And it always feels so good that once I do it. You know, I thought that some things were just absolutely insurmountable. But David pointed out to me in the textbook that there's really no limit to where I can go in this program, because I'll never run out of God. I'll never run out of God. And he showed me in the big book where it said the problem ahead is never greater than the power behind. So I don't care what the problem is. If I pray for willingness, I'm going to be able to surmount that mountain. And it's beautiful. This program is really beautiful. And there's really no limit to where I can go, and I think if it works for me that way, it can work for you, and it will. If we achieve that willingness and we have that desire, it's really beautiful and it's really powerful. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve my conscious contact, praying only for knowledge of His will and the power to carry it out. Prayer is important, but what do you call it? Meditation. Meditation with me is much more important than prayer. And I guess it's all right, I do it sometimes, to pray for things. It's all right if I'm willing to take no for an answer, or maybe, or wait. But I really get more out of meditation than I do out of praying. And it's just phenomenal, the solutions, the answers I get through meditation by continuously doing it. And I had a lot of problems with this in the beginning. I'd start meditating about something and my mind would jump way off over yonder. And I went to David. David said, don't you have a 12 and 12? I said, sure. He said, well, read the explanation in that step 11, where it says about a prayer. And over on the right-hand side at the top, it said, now what about meditation? Evidently, someone else had a problem with it other than me. And Bill says to take some prayer, some strong prayer that you like, and analyze that prayer and try to figure out where that person is that's issuing this prayer, as opposed to where you are in issuing your prayer. And it's absolutely phenomenal. I think the most beautiful prayer that I ever heard, that prayer of St. Francis of Assisi. And I had memorized that prayer. And I could say a part of it and meditate, and could just spend a lot of time on it. Now, I don't do the same thing every morning. Sometimes I have some physical problems, and I have a recliner. I have a couple of them. And it's necessary that I spend a lot of time in a recliner. At least I spend a lot of time in a recliner. And I can put on a tape, old Damon, somebody that I love, and I know his history, and I get to thinking God, what God had wrought. I am absolutely awed at the power that's in this program. And I'm like a friend of mine out in California. There's just no limit. There's just no limit. I have been around this program long enough to see and experience the miraculous healing power of love. There's a lot of power in love. The members of the Quonset group in Memphis, Tennessee, prayed this old sober drunk. And that's the only way that I can explain it. I think that little four-letter word love is a thing that all ministers are trying to reach in their pulpit, in their congregation. It is a powerful force. Love, L-O-V-E. Having had a spiritual awakening, we tried to tote this message to other alcoholics and practice these principles in all our affairs. That scared the stew out of me, that personality change. David had me to turn to Appendix 2 in the back of the book and to read what that is. And it says a spiritual awakening is purely and simply a personality change sufficient to check our alcoholism. I said, that's real simple, David. Why hadn't you told me this before? He says, I couldn't, because you wanted to argue. And this is not something that you argue about. You got to do some things, and as a result of these things being done, you got faith. And that's how it all starts. So I began to do this. But he said, long as we are in this Appendix 2, read the last paragraph. And it says about like this, not exactly the same words, but the same meaning. Many of our members think that a unsuspected power has entered in our lives. And a personality change as a result of this is, in essence, a spiritual awakening. That's simple. I knew a change had taken place in David. And I knew it came from me and God. Probably in that order. But I understood it. And that's the important thing. I understood it. And the more that I practice this, the stronger that the thing gets. And again, I'm really awed. I close with my football story that I always close with. It's really not much of a story, but I just like the way I tell it. And I like to hear it, and I hadn't heard it tonight. So if you'll bear with me, I'll tell it. I think the God of my understanding was getting up a football team a few days ago, and he came to me and said, I'm going to make you the quarterback. Now I'm going to give you 3 men in the backfield that you were introduced to in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm going to give them back to you in the reverse order in which you lost them. I'm going to give you hope, faith, and charity. In 7 men, I'm going to give you 7 people, 7 linemen, I'm going to give you 7 people that you were introduced to in the program. And if you follow these, they'll block out resentment, self-pity, intolerance, impatience, all the stumbling blocks that caused you so much trouble the first 45 years of your life. At the 2 ends, I'm going to give you honesty and humility. At the 2 tackles, patience and tolerance. At the 2 guards, unselfishness and gratitude. And at center, willingness. Now, it'll be necessary that you use willingness on every play. And you've got to use willingness on every play. This game is going to last a lifetime. There'll be no timeouts. So any decisions I make shall be final. The ball is your eternal soul, and the goalpost are the gates of heaven. Now get in there and play ball. I need each and every one of you in my search for truth in this game of life. And I thank God for the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, because there's you people in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous that taught me of the God of my understanding. And if you don't believe that this program works, just keep it simple and follow directions. And if you don't believe that God will help you, just ask Him. Thank you, and God bless you, and I love you.